guest is a talented actor and comedian you know from his work on The Daily Show and Evil. His new panel show, Would I Lie to You, airs Saturdays on the CW. Let's take a look.
If this is a lie, you didn't need to do the horse meat bit. Like, we didn't need that.
Do you mind if I talk to my client for a second?
Sure.
Off mic.
I'm getting hot. I would say.
I suppose a falcon or...
Well, horse meat is a brand of birdseed.
No! See? Guys, Brooke Shields, if this is true, you win the entire show.
Please welcome back to the show, Asif Manvi, everybody. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It was a long time. We were talking backstage. A long time since you've been here, and in the last couple of years, giant life change.
Giant. Well, for all of us. Oh, you mean for my baby?
Yeah, you had a baby.
I had a child.
Yeah.
We
all
I think
had
about
your
is the
child.
pandemic.
Yeah. That's very exciting. So
Yes.
how old? Boy, girl?
Boy.
Okay.
A boy.
Yeah.
And he's 2 years old. He just turned 2. He was born on March 14th, like 3 days before New York went into lockdown.
Yeah, that's
Another
somebody
March
loved the
14th.
lockdown. That's a.
There you go.
Like,
Is that- Hey, lockdown!
Is your birthday March 14th?
Yeah, great. Okay.
They're not. They're
not that
the
excited
best
about it.
communicators. Yeah.
Also, like really lukewarm on their birthday.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had some good ones and some bad ones. So you have a 2-year-old. I feel like personalities are in bloom now.
Oh my gosh, he's great. You know, I waited till I was older to have a child, and so it's great because I get to really be with him and spend time with him. And the other day I went into his room in the morning, and he sat up and he went poop. And I was like, oh, great, you know, you've done a poop. That's great. You're communicating. You're telling me you did a poop.
Yeah.
I put him on the change table. I opened his diaper. Nothing.
Yeah.
And I said, Ishan, you didn't do a poop. And he looks at me and he goes, joking you.
Oh. Jackpot.
I was like that.
Jackpot.
I was like, brilliant. That's solid. That is a solid joke.
That's like level one. That's a good level one joke.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we can get into the whole lying is not joking kind of thing later, but for right now, it was solid. He did a thing the other day where he's now learned the song, red and yellow and pink and blue. So he was singing that, and then he just looks at me and he goes, now funny way. And I was like, okay. And he just started going, Rada yada paga. And I was like, again, solid joke.
I love it. He's like working on a lounge singer act.
He's got a whole, by the time he's 3, he's going on the road.
This is very nice. So I also started later as a dad, and I think it's true. Like, the great thing is there's nothing in your life. Like, no one... If you didn't have a kid, no one would want to hang out with you anyway.
Right.
Because you're too old.
Yes, exactly. And I don't go out well, we had him during the pandemic, so it was actually kind of weirdly great. Like we were sort of in a bubble of having a child, and the whole world was in a bubble.
Yeah.
You know? And so we didn't have any FOMO or any of that stuff. But it's been really amazing because I've just gotten to spend a lot of really quality time with him. And
That's excellent.
And that's good,
yeah, we have to find silver linings. So this show that you have on the CW right now, this is based on a British show.
It's based on a British show.
And when did you discover this show?
So this was 2019. I started watching this British. I'm obsessed with like British shows because I grew up in England. So I watch BritBox like I'm an addict.
Yeah, I love a good BritBox show.
I watched this show called Would I Lie to You on the British BritBox, and I fell in love with it. And and my wife and I would watch it at the end of the day because it was during the Trump administration. And frankly, we needed something to get us through it.
Like at some point, you're like, let's watch British celebrities lie to each other.
So it was just a way to laugh and have fun at the end of the night. And so I actually told Robert King, who is the creator and executive producer of the show Evil that I'm also on, I told him about it. And he started watching it and fell in love with it, and then came to me and said, why don't we do an American version of this show? And, and as an person of Indian descent, I am more than happy to steal something from the British.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Absolutely. It's time to, like, even the score a little bit.
Yeah,
you're owed.
I'm like, I'll
You're owed
take
a
that.
couple ones.
I am.
So that's interesting, though, like you bringing a British sensibility here because you mentioned you grew up in England.
Yeah.
And then how old were you? You moved to Florida, right?
I moved to Tampa, Florida when I was 16.
16.
Yes.
Because
anybody.
And
no,
you're
not one person.
and you were sort of like, I would imagine from like northern England to Florida is a real leap.
Really? You think so?
Yeah. A good stylistic leap. And it's 16. Like you're not, I mean, you're kind of who you are at that point.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah. It was, I went from a coal mining, northern gray English town to Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
Which, you know, and it was interesting because when I got to America, I often joke that like Americans think about the rest of the world the way New Yorkers think about the rest of America.
Yeah.
Like they don't, you know? And so I got here, people didn't really know what I was. They thought I was Australian. They thought I was, you know, Lebanese. They didn't know. So, but it was funny because when I first got to America, I was thrown into this American high school and I was just, you know, this little English boy in an all-American sort of high school. And I just remember I made this friend after a couple of days in high school. He was like, not really, I've never spoken to the guy again, but it was 2 days. He was my friend after 2 days. And while I was talking to him, he suddenly said, okay, well, I'm going to take off. And I remember like my little English brain was just like, you're going to take off? What do you mean? And I just could not fathom this or understand it. We had a teacher who said to me, and this
Did you think he was going to have like a jetpack?
I thought he was going to literally take off right there. Like I was like, do you mean you're going to take off right now? And we had a teacher who, and this must be a Southern thing. I don't know if anybody here is from the South, but she wanted me to take my pen and put it up, which means put it away. It's a Southern vernacular.
Okay, gotcha.
And she said that to me, and I literally took the pen and I didn't know what, and I just put it above my head. And she sent me to detention.
Yeah, it's funny. Like that's a tough. Like 16's tough because like it's not. You're not like a charming British scamp.
No,
it's like who's this 16-year-old?
Yeah, I tried to work the English accent for a while.
Did people ask you things about England? What did people from Tampa think an English person would know?
Well, they thought I knew the Beatles.
Okay,
like it was you know, it was the 80s, and I think they were just like, have you ever met any of them? I'm like, yes, that's right, I have. And I was just trying to work the English angle for a little while. I think there were a couple of girls in my school who might have been Anglophiles who appreciated it.
And then it was like, probably by day 3, they're like, I don't think this guy knows the Beatles. I don't think he's personally met the Beatles. I think
my lack of ability with ladies like outweighed the fact that I had an English accent.
They're like, I think that guy's close personal friends with Paul McCartney, but it's still not worth it. So did you bring, like, was that when you think back to like your, you know, for me, I was lucky because my parents loved like Monty Python. I feel like my education was like SNL. Was yours like the Monty Python era British comedy?
I grew up with Monty Python, and I grew up with Fawlty Towers and all those British sitcoms. Like, you know, there was one called Not the 9 O'Clock News, which Rowan Atkinson came out of. So I sort of grew up with all of that in my head. And in fact, when I was a little kid, I made this like cassette tape that was where, you know, it was back when you had cassettes and you just talk into the little tape player. And I made a tape called The Giant Man-Eating Ostrich.
Okay.
And it was 4.5 hours long of me as a 10-year-old just doing all the characters and it was very Monty Python-esque where this ostrich was just like stomping on all the people in this village, in this town. And then my parents would play it for guests when they would come over.
Yeah. When they would come over for like long dinner parties.
Yes, and my dad would be like, look at our son, look how talented he is. And he'd put this thing in and you could just see people's eyes start to water as they had to listen to 4.5 hours of some little English boy going, and there's a giant eating ostrich coming, oh, mummy. And it's just...
That's a very proud father. That's what I'm going to take away from this story.
Exactly.
Is you have a very proud father.
Very proud of me.
So, but you actually, you ruined dinner parties for years after because you and Connie Britton, the wonderful actor.
Yes.
And I shouldn't say ruin. I was being facetious.
Well, we ruined a few.
But you guys, you were professional. You're young actors in New York.
Yeah.
You would work murder mystery dinner parties?
Murder mystery dinner parties.
And so you would go as actors?
Yes. When I first got to New York and I needed a job and they were paying $50 a show.
That's a good,
which is a solid rate, good rate. And we'd go out to a party somewhere in Jersey or Staten Island or Long Island somewhere, and you just sort of pretend like you were a guest at the party, and then a hitman would come in and kill someone, and then there'd be a detective, and then the whole thing would turn into a murder mystery, and people would play along. And that's where I met Connie, and she and I used to do that together and make the money. And there was one, I remember, this was a legendary one where apparently they did a murder mystery in Staten Island. And I'll just say there were a lot of guys there named Tony.
Okay, a lot of Tonys, yeah.
A lot of Tonys, and it was a guy named Tony's birthday. And it was in an Italian restaurant. And there was some poor actor who had been hired to be the hitman, to come in and kill another actor who was hired as the guy who was going to get killed. So this young actor walks in, pulls out a gun, and asks for the actor who he's going to shoot, and 10 guys pulled out pieces, and everybody hit the deck. And the actor just urinated all over himself, just shook, dropped the gun, walked out, and left the business, I think. He just never was seen of again.
They gave him $55 for that, they gave him a little extra for danger pay.
And then we worked a singles party for Orthodox Jews.
Okay.
That was another one. And I did that one with Connie, actually.
Okay.
She, and I was there, and I said, how do I pretend to be an Orthodox Jewish single? And they said, you're Sephardic. Just don't worry about it. And they just stuck a yarmulke on my head and had me go out there. And I was just do an Egyptian accent. And then Connie was playing this very, she was Connie Britton, so she was one of the most attractive people at this party.
Yeah.
And this poor guy in a yellow, I remember he was wearing a yellow suit, and he was talking to her all night long and thought that he had struck gold.
Yeah.
And then about, an hour into the party, she dies. And I've never seen a man just his face just collapse. But I said $1,000 a plate.
That's fantastic. That's the thing. Wait, if you're doing a murder mystery party, prepare your guests.
Exactly.
Prepare your guests, because you could ruin their evening.
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations on the new show. Congratulations on Evil as well. I know we got season 3 coming out. It's always so great to see you guys. Aasif Mandvi, Would I Lie to You airs Saturdays on the CW.